My husband, Tim, is a loving father to our beautiful 2-year-old girl, and she needs her daddy back. His parents need their little boy back. And all of our brothers and sisters want their brother back. And I beg and I plead to whomever has my husband to please let him go. Please drop him off somewhere. Or make an anonymous call to the police so we know where to find him. It was just a truck. It is just a truck.
On a dark night on May 6, 2013 at around 9 p.m., two men walked down a road in a rural area. They walked up to the driveway of Tim Bosma and Charlene Bosma. They were there to test drive a truck that they saw for sale on Kijiji. The men got to the end of the driveway and greeted Tim and Charlene. One man had a smile on his face and shook both Tim and Charlene's hands. The other man hung back wearing a hoodie and looking at the ground. The respectful sellers of the truck, Tim and Charlene, were a little taken back why these two men came on foot, as it was a rural area and you had to drive everywhere. Tim had a weird feeling about the whole thing and asked his wife Charlene if he should go on the test drive. Charlene said yes, because we don't want the truck to be stolen. Little did she know, those words were gonna haunt her forever. At about 9:20 p.m., Tim and the two respective buyers got in the truck and started driving down the road. About an hour after they left Charlene's, she was wondering what was taking so long and called Tim's cell phone, but the call went to voicemail. Charlene panicked, as Tim would always charge his phone after work, so there's no way it could go to voicemail. Charlene called 911. That night the police came to Charlene's house and made a report on what happened. Little did she know it was too late. There's lots of versions about what happened that night, but the version with the most credibility is as follows. During the test drive, one man that was driving, Tim, was in the passenger seat, and the man with the black hoodie was not saying anything, and he was sitting in the back seat. Only a couple minutes into the test drive, a bullet was fired. Tim was shot in the back of the head and was dead instantly. One man got out of the truck and grabbed their personal truck, and they kept driving, one behind the other. About 30 minutes later, they stopped the truck and got out to change the license plate on Tim's truck. 2 hours later, they drove over to an air hangar. Both men got out of the trucks and entered the hangar on foot. Just outside the hangar, they put Tim's body in an incinerator and burnt his body. The flame went on all night. The next day, one of the men sent out a text to all of his employees that the air hangar was not available that day and they don't need to come into work. A lot of the workers were confused by this text, but they didn't ask any questions. A day after, the employees resumed work as usual. One of the workers saw a black truck that was similar to the one he was seeing on the news. He was taken aback by this, since it has been 2 days since this whole thing happened, and it was a top story in the news. The workers then took a picture of the truck and the bin number and called 911. The police confirmed that this was the truck that they were looking for, and the worker said he instantly ran outside and threw up from the shock he felt. A day after that, he called 911 and gave them the location of the truck, which was the air hangar. Unfortunately, by the time he reported it, the truck was already gone from the air hangar. The theft of this truck and the disappearance of Tim was all over the news, as things of this nature never happened in the small town of Hamilton, Ontario. At first, everyone was certain Tim must have had some sort of gambling debt or involved himself with the wrong people, which is why he went missing. But as police and the people of Hamilton investigated this, they realized that none of that was true. The moment that shocked everyone was when Charlene went on the news and said the notorious words, "It was just a truck." This was the moment everyone realized this could happen to anyone. At some point, police received an anonymous tip that two men that fit the description of the news story came by to test his truck. The anonymous tip came from a military vet and said that the men kept asking about his experience in the military. The man who gave the tip also mentioned that one of the men had a satchel and a distinct tattoo on his arm that read "Ambition." At this point, the police had enough information to make an arrest. They realized that the truck was at the Milliard air hangar, and the man who did all this was previously arrested, and they took a picture of his tattoo that said "Ambition." That's how they helped identify him. They arrested a man named Dellen Milliard. They charged him with theft of a truck and forcible confinement of Tim. When Tim's wife found out about all this, that Dellen Milliard was arrested, she was super excited. She was happy they found a man responsible for stealing the truck, and she was looking forward to seeing Tim again. Little did she know, she will never see Tim again. Shortly after, the police received another anonymous tip that there's a truck inside of a trailer outside of their house. So the police came by and seized the trailer. Later on, they opened the trailer, and sure enough, there was Tim's truck. After further investigation, they found a shell casing, gun residue, and fingerprints of Dylan and Tim all over the truck. They also found a lot of blood stains that were poorly cleaned off of the truck. Police also found an incinerator that had the name "The Eliminator" written on it in a field near the air hangar. Anthropologists got to work on it and found Tim's remains. He was burnt beyond recognition that night, and he was only identified through ashes and fragments in the incinerator. So, what was the motivation behind this heinous act? Well, it all starts with a man named Dellen Milliard. Dellen Milliard was born into money. He had a rich family, rich dad, rich grandfather. Everybody was rich. His grandfather ran an air hangar, and Dellen's dad took it over as his grandfather got older. Dylan's dad would obviously bring his son, Dellen, to the air hangar. And just at 14 years old, Dellen was full of wonder. He was the youngest person in the world that flew a helicopter and a plane by himself on the same day. He was in the news for that. By his 20s, his life started to get a bit turbulent. Dellen started using all sorts of drugs. He would throw parties with hundreds, and I mean hundreds, of 20-somethings in attendance. He was well liked and appreciated by everybody. Eventually, he dropped out of university because he was so deep in this party lifestyle. His family being well off kind of made him not care about life because he just wanted to have fun. He was a good friend to everybody and would often pay for the parties and take them out to restaurants and pay for the bill. This made a lot of people look up to him. His party lifestyle attracted a lot of great people, but also attracted a lot of bad people. One of these men, who were one of the bad people, was named Mark Smitch. Mark Smitch was the other man who accompanied Dellen Milliard that night to steal the truck. He was a high school dropout, and he sold Mary Jane small time. He did graffiti. He was arrested for graffiti.
Clues. Tell the cops anything and then you die on the news. Peace, bitch. You're deceased, kid.
He was a pretty mess of a person, to say the least. Dellen would take these young males under his wing and help them do things like get their driver's license. He'd sometimes give them a car, give them a vehicle, and help pay their bills. Oftentimes letting these men sleep in his basement for months at a time. Dellen at the time lived at home with his father, and his father was kind of mad that he let these men sleep in the basement. So Dellen's father would do things like he'd turn the heat off, or he'd not leave food in the fridge. He'd have an empty fridge, so these guys in the basement had nothing to eat. But these guys in the basement didn't care. They were just happy to be there. Eventually, Dellen wanted more stimulation in his life, so he started going on these adventures that he called missions. These missions would oftentimes be theft. He would round up some of his men and go steal lawnmowers or things of that nature. At one point, he stole a motorcycle that he saw posted on Kijiji. It wasn't until later he got into murder, which led up to him stealing Tim's truck and getting rid of Tim in the process. The thing is, Dellen had the money to buy all these things like lawnmowers or motorcycles, but he got a thrill out of stealing other people's property. He would take all these things he stole back to his dad's air hangar, where he'd take things apart, oftentimes just destroying the vehicles for a quick thrill. Eventually, the air hangar turned into a full-blown chop shop. One of the men that worked at his air hangar stated that Dellen would show up with his men, and they would just follow what Dellen said. Dellen was a puppet master at this point. Eventually, Dellen Millard's father was fed up with all this, and he was done with Dellen's shenanigans, and decided to cut off Dellen from the family business and not allow him to visit the air hangar. On November 29th, 2012, Dellen's father was having a nap. Dellen went into his room and shot his father in the back of the head, killing him instantly. Later that night, Dellen was brought into police station for questioning. Dellen was extremely good at manipulating people and situations, and made it seem like his dad was in a dark place and been drinking a lot and been losing money on the business. When all was said and done, they said Dellen's father died from suicide. There's a 54-minute police interrogation of Dellen posted on the internet. Mind you, this happened just a couple hours after shooting his father in the head. You can see in the investigation, Dellen's very good at steering the conversation, all while keeping a stone-cold expression on his face. This is why he was so influential and people liked him. He was a master manipulator and felt like he was untouchable. Every time he got away with a crime, whether it just be stealing a vehicle or murder, it just fueled him to keep going on these missions, as he was above the law. This caused him to just commit murder at his leisure. At one point, he met this woman named Laura Babcock at a bar in downtown Toronto. At this time, Laura was unfortunately struggling with a lot of mental health problems, along with struggling to find reliable income. She was infatuated by Dellen, as he was well off and he had this crazy party boy lifestyle. They dated for just 1 month and agreed to stay friends. Basically, friends with benefits. At one point, Dellen started dating another woman named Christina Nudga. Christina didn't like that Dellen was in touch with Laura, as they were in the same friend group. Christina and Laura exchanged malice text messages, oftentimes bragging about who slept with who and when's the last time they slept with Dellen. Very bad stuff. Things were getting a little heated. Dellen told Laura at one point, like, you need to get away from my life because I'm dating Christina and I don't want to talk to you. But Laura always found a way back into his life. Eventually, Dellen told Christina that he's going to remove Laura from their lives completely. And that's exactly what he did. One night, Dellen asked Laura to meet him at a subway station, where he picked her up in a car, drove her to his house. What all happened that night is not confirmed, but the story with the most evidence is as follows. Dellen basically shot Laura in the head, wrapped her up in a tarp, Dellen went as far as taking pictures of Laura's lifeless body wrapped in the tarp. One picture actually has a dog in it. This shows you how untouchable Dellen felt. He documented clear evidence that he was involved in this murder and he just didn't care. Later that night, he called over his friend Mark Smitch to help him burn the body. This was the first time they used the incinerator. He recorded her body burning. All in all, Dellen was charged with all three murders: the murder of Tim, Dellen's father, and Laura. When it was time for Dellen to go to court for the murder of Tim, that's when things started to get even more twisted. To start things off, Dellen didn't hire a lawyer, despite having loads of money for a great one. He wanted to be his own lawyer. He sauntered around the courtroom as he was better than everybody, and he felt like he was untouchable, and he told his side of the story. Dellen and Mark both turned on each other almost instantly. Dellen stated that he had no intention on murdering anyone that night, he just wanted to take the truck. However, at some point there was an altercation, and Mark was sitting in the back seat, and he fired the shot that killed Tim. Mark Smitch, on the other hand, argued everything was going smoothly, and out of nowhere, Dellen just shot him in the head for no reason. He stated after they stepped out of the truck, it looked like something came over Dellen. It looked like he was possessed by a demon or something. The judge and the jury weren't buying any of this BS. The jury was very disgusted at the whole case and didn't care who did it at this point. All they cared about was both men were involved in this, and they need a harsh sentence for both of them. Eventually, the courtroom reached a verdict. Dellen Milliard was sentenced to life in prison with no possibility of parole for 25 years. Mark Smitch was sentenced to life in prison with no possibility of parole for 25 years. Tim's wife was happy with the verdict and decided, as devastating as everything was, she can finally live in some sort of peace now. A few years later, Dellen and Mark had another court date for the murder of Dellen's father and the murder of Laura Babcock. You see, these murders only came to light because of the murder of Tim Bosma. They now had both these men in jail, and they could find more evidence. Once again, in the Laura Babcock trial, Dellen decided to represent himself. He took things a lot further this time. Dellen cross-examined Laura's family, asking about Laura's mental health state. He even questioned the father, asking if the father did a good job at raising Laura Babcock. This shocked the whole courtroom. A lot of times people were gasping at a lot of the things that he was asking. A lot of the evidence was also making people gasp. One piece of evidence that was seeing that Dellen kept an iPad that said Laura's iPad. Even something as small as that made everyone gasp. They used this iPad to freestyle.
Bitch started off all skin and bone. Now the bitch lay on some ashy stone. Last time I saw her outside the home. And if you go swimming, you can find a phone.
Both Dellen and Mark got another life sentence for the murder of Laura. Dellen was given another 25 years for the murder of his father. All in all, Dellen and Mark will never see the light of day. There hasn't been much on Dellen or Mark recently, as they're both just rotting in jail. However, Dellen was involved in a prison stabbing not too long ago, where he almost took the life of another inmate. He was sentenced to 1 year for the stabbing.